Television Network. This is the 5:30 News on Q2, Montana's news leader.
Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Jay Cohn.
And I'm Jeanelle Slade. The GOP tax reform bill moves closer to a Senate vote, possibly by week's end.
Today, the Senate Budget Committee approving the Republican tax cut bill, but on a close 12-11 party line vote.
So it appears the stage is set for a lively debate on the floor of the Senate later this week.
The overriding question, does the GOP bill have enough votes to pass? With the Republicans holding 52 seats in the Senate, they can only stand to lose 2 votes and still get that bill passed.
And Montana Senator Steve Daines in the middle of this tax reform storm. Now, normally a lock-solid GOP vote, Daines says as the bill stands now, he can't support it.
CBS's Weijia Zhang joining us now from Washington, D.C. tonight to shed more light on the situation. Weijia, any updates if Senator Daines may be prepared to shift his vote from no to yes?
Well, Jay, I was in touch with Senator Daines' office late this afternoon, and even though he had lunch with President Trump today, who is personally lobbying all the Republican holdouts, Daines says he is not ready to commit just yet because he wants to see even more changes. His biggest concern is that this legislation, as it is right now, favors large corporations over small businesses, and as you know, that just doesn't fly in Montana because 68% of all private sector employment comes from Main Street jobs. So the senator says he is optimistic about what's to come in the next few days, that he believes there will be more negotiations, but as of tonight, he is not a yes vote.
Now, Weijia, have you seen any changes to the bill today that you think might sway those senators who are currently on the fence or even those who are against the bill?
As you know, we've already seen tweaks. The Budget Committee added a provision that would allow drilling in Alaska, which has always been a contentious issue. And then Senator Susan Collins of Maine had an amendment passed that certainly will help to get her support, and that would allow homeowners to deduct at least a portion of their local property taxes on their federal returns. So we are seeing tweaks here and there and expect more changes to come in order to get those 10 or so holdouts on the other side of the fence. But as Jay mentioned earlier, they can only afford to lose 2 votes, so they really have a lot of work to do. I can tell you, though, that they will not take a vote until they are confident they have enough to get this passed.
Well, we also understand lawmakers were online to tackle another big-ticket item today, that is funding the government, but they came across an unexpected setback. What can you tell us?
Yeah, they sure did, Jay. Congressional lawmakers, leaders were supposed to have a meeting with President Trump at the White House. Only this morning, he fired off a tweet that said, "I don't see a deal happening." That was aimed towards the Democrats, and that is why minority leaders Chuck Schumer of the Senate and Nancy Pelosi of the House didn't show up to this meeting. And President Trump was very clearly upset about this. He slammed them during a photo opportunity. He had their nameplates on the table next to their empty seats. And the Republican leaders also slammed the Democrats, saying they don't remember when they didn't go to a meeting, even if the White House was under a different party. But Chuck Schumer said he is willing to come to the table. He does want to negotiate so the government stays open, but they don't want to do that until President Trump shows that he is serious, and suggested one way to do that is to stop tweeting. Of course, President Trump is not likely to do that, so it really depends on who gives in first and says, hey, let's try again and actually come to the table and have some talks.
All right, thank you. Weijia Zhang reporting live tonight from our nation's capital.
Thanks, Weijia. Well, as this debate in Congress heats up over tax reform, Montanans, of course, want to know how the bill affects them.
MTN chief political reporter Mike Dennison has been crunching the numbers and shows us why or how.
Tax cut legislation in Washington is a swiftly moving target these days, but experts at the Montana Department of Revenue have analyzed its likely impacts to Montana income taxpayers. Based on an early version of the tax cut bill before the U.S. Senate, here's some of what they found. Overall, the 500,000 Montana households who file federal income tax returns would pay nearly $800 million less in federal taxes next year if the bill passes. About 1/3 of those households would see only minimal changes to their federal tax bill, less than $50 a year. Yet nearly 2/3 of the taxpaying households in Montana would see a reduction of more than $50 a year, or at least 2% of their tax burden. Also, a huge chunk of the reductions flows to upper income earners. Nearly half of the entire estimated cut in Montana, $386 million, goes to the top 3% of earners here, the approximately 15,000 households making more than $196,000 a year. These households would get an average tax cut of almost $26,000 each. Now, let's look at the middle tier of Montana households, those earning between $20,000 and $64,000 a year. This group would get an average cut of about $700 a year, and almost 80% of these 200,000 households should expect to see their taxes cut by more than $50 a year. In the lowest earning third of Montana households, about 70% would see little or no tax changes under the bill, but the average reduction per household would still be about $290 next year. It's estimated that 1/4 of this group would see tax cuts of more than $50 a year. Only about 1% of Montana households are expected to pay higher federal income taxes under the tax revision bill, and most of those would be in the middle income ranges. Democratic U.S. Senator John Tester says he's a big no on the bill, which passed out of committee Tuesday. He says it explodes the deficit and benefits wealthy out-of-staters instead of Montanans. Montana's Republican Congressman Greg Gianforte notes that the House tax cut bill does not lower the top income tax rate and says it gives benefits to all income categories. Republican Senator Steve Daines says he'd like changes in the Senate bill to ensure smaller businesses are treated fairly. The State Revenue Department analysis did not analyze the impact of the bill's corporate tax cuts in Montana. Still, we have a pretty good idea of who would benefit from these cuts directly and by how much. Now we'll see if Republicans can pass a bill. Reporting from Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
All right, thank you very much, Mike. Again, that full Senate vote is expected sometime later this week.
In other news tonight, a hardened man now admits he beat his daughter to death last April with a belt.
Q2's Asia Gore was in the courtroom today and brings us the shocking details. Asia.
Jay and Jeanelle, the victim was only 2 years old when she was violently beaten with a belt by her father, who admitted today he had no reason to even be upset with her. 23-year-old Dana Redding Jr. pleaded guilty in Bighorn County District Court to the charge of deliberate homicide for the death of Isabella. As part of a plea agreement, prosecutors will dismiss charges of aggravated assault and assault with a weapon and recommend a sentence of 50 years at the Montana State Prison. Redding said little at today's hearing, but did answer questions about the assault. He admitted he beat his daughter repeatedly with a belt until she died, but he said he did not intend to kill her. Redding's wife, Cavanna Grace George, allegedly knew Redding had beat their daughter before, but never reported the abuse. She still faces a charge of criminal child endangerment. Authorities arrived at the home and transported the girl to the hospital where she was pronounced dead. Medical staff reported that the victim had severe bruising all over her body and an open head wound. Redding is set for sentencing in January. George maintains her innocence. Jay and Jeanelle.
All right, thanks so much, Asia.
Well, there's a new warden in charge at the Montana State Women's Prison here in Billings.
After her first full day on the job, Warden Jenny Hansen sat down with Q2's Samantha Harrelson to talk about what she hopes to bring to the table.
When I was in high school, when I was in college, this is what I wanted to do. So it's kind of a dream come true that I get to be the warden. It's still a little hard to get used to that Warden Hansen name. But it's always what I wanted to do, is to help people.
Warden Jenny Hansen is a Billings native, graduating from Billings Central High School before going to college to pursue a career in law enforcement.
When I started here in 2009, I really started to develop a passion for gender-specific care for inmates. It's very important to make sure that there's gender-specific care for the females here, and that we look at things a little bit different through different eyes, because the women are different. We all are different.
Hansen spent most of her career in probation and parole, specifically dealing with those battling mental illness. Most recently, she was the Eastern Region Bureau Chief for the Division of Probation and Parole, overseeing 10 field offices while implementing new procedures and championing the use of evidence-based practices like the risk and needs assessments to ensure more individualized and effective care.
98% of these women are coming back out to the community, so what can we do inside the prison to help habilitate them? What programming can we offer to them? What can we do so that they return to their respective communities and be successful? We know that 80% of the women have some kind of trauma in their life, and there's a whole lot of intricate details to help with that, and I think that's the biggest goal that I have, is to ensure that we're using evidence-based practices with gender specifics, as well as making sure we're trauma-informed while keeping the community safe.
In Billings, Samantha Harrelson, MTN News.
All right, thanks, Samantha.
Now, Warden Hansen says she also wants to improve the relationship and understanding between the prison and the community, and she hopes to do that by educating the public on some of the beneficial programs run at the prison.
Still ahead on tonight's 5:30 News, if those nightly Z's are something you can only dream of, well, there are ways to combat insomnia.
And tonight in sports, we'll actually unveil 2 Breens, but Scott's not related to Q2's Athlete of the Week.
And coming up in the weather, well, we had another nice day today, but we're kind of in between weather disturbances, but we still wound up with a high temperature of 49 degrees. But a new cold front moves through overnight. Could see some snow flurries coming our way. We'll have the details coming your way in a few more minutes.
You're watching MTN News with Jay Cohn and Jeanelle Slade. Storm Tracker weather with Bob McGuire. And sports with Scott Green. This is the 5:30 News on Q2, Montana's news leader.